Hi, it's Ray. Welcome back to my channel. I hope you're doing really well. It's just been middle grade maths, which gave me the opportunity to think about children's literature, not that I don't do that enough already, and to reflect on why I'm so passionate about reading children's literature as an adult. And in this video, I would like to share with you 5 reasons why I think it's so important and worthwhile to read children's literature as an adult as well as just as a child. Before I share them, I want to quickly address my status as a reader of children's literature. So I'm a primary school teacher. I currently teach children who are about 6 and 7 years old, and I've previously mostly taught children who are 10 and 11 years old. But I really do feel that my job is just completely irrelevant when it comes to my passion and love for children's literature. I don't have children, and if I wasn't a teacher, I would still read children's literature for pleasure, or at least I really hope that I would. I sometimes find that I kind of qualify my passion for children's literature with the fact that I'm a primary school teacher, and I wish that I didn't do that, because it's buying into this kind of societal view that there's sort of a stigma attached to reading children's books when you're no longer a child, and that growing up and becoming a functioning adult means that you need to let go of and never again cherish some of the most treasured and beautiful parts of being a child. And that kind of cultural view, I think, is just malign and downright wrong. Good writing for children is good writing for everyone. C.S. Lewis put it really nicely. He said, "No book is really worth reading at the age of 10, which is not equally, and often far more, worth reading at the age of 50 and beyond." So the experience of reading children's literature can be as shallow or deep as you want it to be. There's a master's, which I have kind of had my eye on but not had any legitimate reason to apply for, and definitely can't afford, at Cambridge in children's literature. So that tells you all you need to know about how intellectual children's literature can be. It's definitely not reading material that you should avoid because you're beyond it. That said, there are lots of different ways to read children's literature. You don't have to approach it as an academic. And I think all ways of reading children's literature at all ages are equally valid. So in no particular order, here are my 5 reasons why you should read children's literature as an adult and some different ways to approach it. Point number 1 is to reconnect with your younger self. So I passionately believe that books are portals not only to other worlds, but also to past and potentially future versions of yourself. And when you reread or even touch the physical object of a book that you read at some point in your childhood, I think you can instantly be transported back to a time, to a place, to a version of yourself who you've otherwise lost touch with. I think we, especially those of us who were avid readers as children, have a sense of our personality being physically constructed out of numerous different books that we read, and to go back and reconnect with those books is one way of reconnecting to our former self. I tend to do this most frequently through children's classics, just because I love the writing style of them so much. However, sometimes I will go back and read a book that is really more written for children than universally, something like The Home Farm Twins, just a book that I really enjoyed and treasured as a child, to get that nostalgia, to get that memory, and to remember what my passions, my enthusiasms were when I was younger. I do also think that you actually don't just have access to your childhood self through rereading books that you read as a child. You can also connect to the emotions and experiences you had as a child sometimes by reading a new children's book. Someone like Noel Streatfeild does a very good job of expressing some of the emotions you feel in childhood: shyness, humiliation, a pure and unadulterated joy. All of those emotions are often described wonderfully in children's literature, and reconnecting with those feelings is something really special that you would never want to lose. This segues quite nicely into my second point, which is to connect with children now. Whether you're a parent, whether you work with children, or, in my view, most importantly, if you think you have absolutely nothing at all to do with children, reading children's literature is a way for you to remember what it's like to be a child, and therefore be more able to communicate positively with the children who you might meet in your life, even if that's just a kid on the tube when you're travelling around London. I think as a society, we can quite easily other children. We almost put them in this non-human category as being completely different in their experience of the world, in their interests, and in the way that we have to communicate with them. And while of course we don't communicate with a 5-year-old the same way that we communicate with our spouse, children are very much people now, and reading children's literature for me is one of the quickest way to jump into remembering just how whole an experience of the world you have as a child, just how much your emotions, your thoughts, your concerns are as of equal value as those of an adult. My worries and concerns when I was 9 felt just as big to me as my worries and concerns now do. Just because I'm no longer 9 doesn't mean that another 9-year-old's worries and concerns are unimportant. Authors like Roald Dahl do a fantastic job of showing the kind of malignant side of this in people like Miss Trunchbull, who, claims she was never a child. But even though most of us don't maliciously think children are horrible, it's still very much deemed societally okay to say, I don't like children, and we can all benefit from a reminder of how complex and complete is the inner world of each and every child who exists. I'll finish this with one of my favourite quotes. This is by Polish children's rights activist from approximately 100 years ago. He says, "Children are not the people of tomorrow, but people of today. They have a right to be taken seriously and to be treated with tenderness and respect." Reason number 3 is to get a sense of your own growth since childhood. So the book that really got me back into reading children's literature is a book called How to Be a Heroine by Samantha Ellis. And in this book, she goes back and rereads all of the books that she read growing up and looks at what they meant to her at the time as a child and how her experience of them now as an adult often completely differed. I really, really enjoyed this book when I read it. It just totally shifted my perspective on children's literature and on the meaning and worth that it can have in our lives right now. The only thing I would say about it is that it quite irritatingly spoils quite a large number of the plots that she talks about, so do kind of be prepared for that if you read it. Most of the books that it covers are classic books that you are likely to have read, but for some sections you might want to kind of skim over it if she's talking about a book that you haven't read but think you would like to. Anyway, this gave me the idea that it would be worthwhile going back and rereading books that had meant a lot to me as a child to see how I felt about them as an adult. Little Women is a prime example, and something that Ellis does really nicely in How to Be a Heroine, and something that I've similarly found myself, is that often when you go back to a book that you loved as a child, you realise that there are flaws in it, particularly often in its kind of moral worldview, especially if it's an older book. But in spite of those flaws, you can still feel how perfect it was to you when you were younger, and you can still take an enormous amount of joy from the writing style, from the characters, from the plot, from perhaps certain moral aspects of it, even if at the same time you can see that the book hasn't aged perfectly, or that there were things in it that you admired that you no longer admire. Perhaps there are other things that you take more from now than you did when you were younger. And I think it's just really interesting, that experience of rereading, to see where you were and where you are now. Is to reaffirm your core values. I know that sounds a bit airy-fairy, but hear me out on this one. I think children's books, more so than adults' books, often cut to the heart of what it means to be alive and of which values are the most important things in life to stand by. Another quote coming up. This is from Catherine Rundell, who's a modern children's author, and she wrote an essay called Why You Should Read Children's Literature Even Though You're So Old and Wise. It's really short, I think it's only like 60 pages or something, so it's worth a quick flick through. When I read it, I already had kind of thought most of the thoughts in it, but she expresses those thoughts really succinctly and beautifully, and I particularly adore this quote. I'm going to read it because it's quite a long one. Children's novels spoke and still speak of hope. They say, look, this is what bravery looks like. This is what generosity looks like. Children's books say, the world is huge. They say, hope counts for something. They say, bravery will matter, wit will matter, empathy will matter, love will matter. These things may or may not be true. I do not know. I hope they are. I love that quote so very much, and for me it just gets straight to the heart of why children's literature is so special and treasured, because in children's books, like Rundell says, often those big things which in a more realistic adult's novel might not always pay off, bravery, love, kindness, these things can still lead to disappointment and ruin. In children's novels, they tend to be worth something, and they give you the hope and the drive that you need in order to implement those values in your own life and to be brave and to be kind and to be loving, even though you know that it might not pay off. And I think that optimism and that hope is so rich in so much children's literature, and having an injection of that into your reading diet as an adult is pure joy. It can give you so much more motivation to just live your life right and to enjoy your life. On the flip side, like I mentioned earlier, with some older children's books and even some modern day children's books I sometimes read and think, I don't really agree with that way of expressing something to a child or to your reader in general. The fact that children's books are often more explicitly moralistic than adults' books, without necessarily being lectury, but just more focused on moral values, even if you disagree with them, gives you a good opportunity to reflect on, okay, well, how do I think that character should have handled that situation? In my own life, how am I applying this value? You know, how am I being brave? Am I speaking out in a way which is rude, or am I standing up for myself? I think children's literature really gives us that opportunity to reflect on who we are, how we live our life, and how we want to live our life. And if we need it, there's so much inspiration in there to help us live our lives the best that we can do. Number 5, finally and most importantly, the other ones I said there was no ranking, but for this one, most importantly, children's books are fun. And if you just cut off all children's literature because you think you're above it, you are missing out on some of the best writing that exists for humankind. You are missing out on magnificent fantasy stories, on brilliant characters, gripping plots, other worlds, this world. You're missing out on some of the best descriptive writing that I've ever read, on some of the most moving and poignant tales. A lot of children's writing is as good as writing comes. It can easily stand up against the best writing for adults. And going full circle back to Lewis's quote, a book that's good for a child of 10 is good for anybody. I hope very much that this video has inspired you to go and read some more children's books, to enjoy them, and to feel brave enough to read them without there being any stigma attached whatsoever for reading some of the best literature that exists on this planet. Enjoy your children's books. Please comment down below what one of your favourite works of children's literature is. I'm always looking for new children's books to read, and I love your recommendations. Thank you so very much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.